So you speak how many languages?
It's always a good question because my answer is it depends how you define speak. I sometimes struggle with English still now, so it'll be interesting doing this interview with you or speaking with you in English. But yeah, no, so English, Russian, German and French. They're the ones I feel most confident, most able in.
And the ones that you're more insecure in?
Like Spanish, Dutch, Italian, Romanian. I mean, like, it's just like phrases, and I can understand varying degrees. I spent like 4 weeks in Romania volunteering in an orphanage.
What led you to that?
University. Just, I had the opportunity, basically. I saw it was advertised, and I was like, that'd be good fun, to spend a month in the middle of nowhere in Romania. I like sort of Eastern Europe generally, obviously, I suppose.
Why? What takes you to that?
Eastern Europe? It's the madness of the place, because I like the fact that it's very European, but they just, like, they're very laid back, laissez-faire, kind of, you know, you do you, but I'm going to do my way, and I don't really care. We can recognise it, you know, if that makes sense, like the how people are, but also I think their mentality is just different enough that there's something really kind of attractive and sexy and bizarre and kind of quirky about it.
And what is life like in a Romanian orphanage?
Yeah, I'd say quite sad. Yeah. Because a lot of these, I call them children, but they weren't. They were actually older than me. But basically, and obviously at the end of when the Soviet Union collapsed, and that meant obviously all of the Soviet satellite states kind of collapsed and faded away, and Romania being one of them. And Romania was probably the most kind of deplorable regime. You know, Ceausescu, famously, who then, you know, the Romanian people ended up murdering him, essentially. But these were children who, they were actually adults, but they, you know, had been abandoned, like left by the wayside kind of in the 90s, because their parents had them, but they knew they had some sort of problem. Maybe the boy or girl had some sort of defect of some sort, could have been physical, and then they obviously didn't want them, and they were kind of left almost to rot. And I don't know, I think it was originally like a religious organisation that...
It's horrific.
It was awful. So, you know, working with them was so rewarding. You know, it was good fun, like, because it was just, they were so sweet, and it's just the simplest things that, you know, made them happy. And, you know, one day we bought like a girl, we went to the supermarket, and there was this girl that liked dinosaurs, or I should say, you know, really she'd probably been, I don't know, 29, 30, but obviously, like, because of their problems, that, you know, their disability, some of them had the mental age of a child, right? There was this one girl who absolutely loved dinosaurs, and we saw this dinosaur book in the supermarket, and we bought it for her, and she went absolutely wild. It was the sweetest thing, you know, dinosaur, she kept saying, and it made her day, it made our trip, you know.
So what led you towards Russia then? Was it just a natural progression from Eastern Europe? Here we go.
I think, well, I suppose it all started at school. Like, we had the opportunity to do various languages, and I did French, German, and even Chinese for 1 year. I didn't really like Chinese. It was too sort of different, too alien.
Why was it alien?
It was just, there's no
ABC. They're all intricate characters.
Yeah,
aren't they?
it's characters. It's a completely different language. I mean, I have colleagues, I have friends that, you know, speak Chinese, and I can understand the appeal of it, but it's just so alien, I think, to our way of life and our perception of the world, that I think that it, you know, and having been to China, it really is a shock to the system,
because
it's so different. You know, it's so different. The way people are on the street, the way things are done, you know, the culture generally, the way we act, you know, is completely different to them.
Even in a major city
like Beijing, Shanghai. I mean, just for example, you know, for me personally, one of the things that I found culturally shocking about China is just that, you know, you go into a toilet in a restaurant and there's no soap, or there's no toilet paper sometimes, or there's no... Why? And that's quite that's just standard. I don't know. I've absolutely no idea, and that's not a kind of a dig at the place. It's so different to Europe. They just don't have the same
hygiene,
standard of hygiene, or the same laws. For example, I remember being on the street, and, you know, very vividly remember people just sort of spitting. Yeah, but I mean, I know you see people spit here, or you see footballers on the pitch, they spit, right? But I mean, over there, people really kind of like spitting on the street as you're walking, and
so like Jack in Titanic, you're talking.
Something of the sort, yeah.
So communism's always fascinated you then?
Oh yeah, I'm a diehard communist. I'm always reading Marx and Engels and everything. No, I mean, yeah, I mean, I suppose when you say, oh, you know, I speak Russian, or I studied Russian, and I've got no sort of familial link to the place at all, or I didn't have any friends in Russia before I started learning the language. And people always say, oh, did you want to be a spy, or are you a communist? I mean, no, none of those things. You asked me how did I kind of get to Russian, and I think I'm still trying to understand that today.
But then I think with people, some people are terribly drawn to Scotland.
Yeah.
And you're just drawn to Russia.
Well, I suppose, so I did French and German at school. I took them to A-level, and originally I was going to do French and German at uni, but then I kind of decided at the last minute, actually, I want to do something a bit different. And I'd always liked history, and I always wanted to go to Moscow for some reason. And I think then in my head, I developed this idea of this really like idyllic, mad lifestyle of being in Siberia and meeting like a Russian girl and having like a family and living, in like -30 in the winter and chopping wood, and I don't know. And none of that ever came to fruition.
None of that to me fulfills any form of fantasy, because when any of that is depicted in movies, it's always extreme poverty.
Yeah. But for me, there was something sort of, I don't know, charming about it. A really primitive way of life. I don't know.
To me, Russian is very... So it is like this and that's that. It's almost like German. I don't mean the language. I mean, when I have come across Russians, there is an abruptness with no smile.
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
And I know that Hungarians don't smile much, and I've never got it.
But again, it's a cultural thing, right? For them it's quite normal, but for us it's strange. And in England or in the UK we have this like surface, you have to be quite polite and respectful, friendly, jovial would be the word. You smile at people. I mean, out there, if you smile at people just kind of on the tube, on the metro there, people are like, is there something wrong with this fella? What's wrong with him?
But where does that come from culturally?
For when you speak to Russians about this, or Russian speakers as well, because it's not just Russians, but say people from Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Ukraine as well, they sometimes find us almost too fake in a way, like that. In that our level of friendship's more like a surface thing. It's more of a kind of conventional, it's like a relationship of convenience as opposed to like a deep, meaningful friendship. So for them, well, what's the point of just being friendly to every Tom, Dick and Harry that you see on the street?
I get that because my friend's partner is Hungarian, and Neil said to me when I first met Miklos, he won't smile, they don't acknowledge in the same way, and kind of explained exactly what you do, and it is very disconcerting. It's like you're looking for confirmation that you're being polite, and he's taking it as being polite, and that you're being funny.
But it's not. It's just their way of life, and I mean that's what I like. It's like this, like when I've been there and to Eastern Europe generally, it's like you can kind of be a different version of yourself that you never knew existed. For example, in England, like I'd always find I'm really polite. I'll always say please. I'll always say thank you. I love going out there. You don't have to say please. You don't have to say thank you. It's just, and it's reflected in the language. Like I mean, you probably should say please, like in some scenarios, obviously, like transactional or thank you, but you don't have to really, the way it's expected here. For example, in Russian you can be in a bar or a restaurant and you don't address a waiter as a waiter. You'll just either say the equivalent for young man or girl. So say if it's a girl, you can just say girl, give beer, the equivalent, and it's quite normal just to say that. But for us it's shocking, right?
Yeah,
it's strange. Yeah, but for them it's normal. And it's fun. It's fun to kind of like reinvent yourself and be like this kind of, Russian. I want beer. Give beer. And you're like, I didn't know that existed in me.
The first human settlement on Russia, as they call it, I think dates back to the Older One period, whenever that is. I found in research.
Don't you remember it?
I realise that people don't normally slap interviewees, however. And this was in the lower Paleolithic, about 2 million years ago, apparently. Representatives of Homo erectus migrated to the Taman Peninsula in southern Russia, and it's the biggest country in the world by landmass. So did all life start in Eastern Europe, we wonder?
Well, that story I didn't know, but what I can definitely tell you is that Kiev far outdates Moscow. And Kiev is the home of before Russia was a country, it was Kiev and Rus. And this is...
Belarus?
No, Kiev and Rus. So as in the city of Kiev, or Kiev as we now, say, is really the birthplace of Russia, the Russia that we know, the Russia that's represented by Vladimir Putin and so on, or the Russian state, perhaps I should say, that's represented by Vladimir Putin.
They broke away a long time ago, didn't they?
Yes, yeah. So this is by no means my mastermind subject, but I know a little bit about it. But essentially, the Russia that we know today of Moscow and Petersburg, all of that started in Kiev. And the Slavic peoples, so this would also incorporate, Poland and so on, they originally spoke kind of a Slavic language that was far more interconnected and similar, and then it broke away into 3 different branches. So the Western Slavonic, which would be like Czech and Polish, Southern Slavonic, which would be like Serbian, Croatian, and then Eastern Slavonic, which became Russian. And Russian was like the most... And also Ukrainian would go into that category as well. They're different languages. They're similar.
So you've been around Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
So they're not the same, but
No.
this kind of deadpan, I want beer. Are they all the same? And is that where Germany gets its abruptness?
That's a good question. I don't know. I always think that, I was in Germany, last week, and I had another culture shock. Maybe I kind of had forgotten how direct the Germans can be, but I always think that that's almost maybe not a misportrayal, or I think there's a degree of fiction in it. But I personally think the Russians are actually more direct than the Germans.
So you lived in Russia?
I studied there. Yeah, I spent the longest stint was like 5.5, 6 months, and then I've been back a few times since. Yeah.
So what's that like?
It was amazing. I remember one of the most shocking things in a way was as obviously English we use the Latin alphabet, right? Obviously the Russian language uses Cyrillic, and Cyrillic alphabet kind of comes from, they have a few of the Latin letters, but it's mainly from the Greek alphabet. So
is that those? Because when I was researching to talk to you, I was on Wikipedia, and I couldn't even. That's Cyrillic, is it? The
weird, the different letters. Yeah, the ones. So like the backwards.
Yeah.
The backwards R, the backwards N. That's the Cyrillic alphabet. Yeah.
Okay.
And some people would, you'd ask that, but that alphabet serves a really good purpose because it has some of the, words that require various number of syllables are represented by one letter. So, for example, the sound sh, right, in English would be sh, but in Russian they have one letter that conveys that sound. So it is helpful, or the sound ch, like church. That ch is also conveyed by one letter. So the point I wanted to go back to, you asked what's it like to spend 6 months in a country like that. I remember at the end, my eyes were so tired of seeing the Cyrillic alphabet everywhere. I wanted to see the Latin alphabet, and that's one thing. If you go to France or Germany, you take for granted if you've never been placed in that like really alienating setting like Russia, China, Japan, Korea. Your eyes, if you're a native, not only English speaker, but like a native English reader, or it would be the same if we were Spanish or whatever, you'd want to see the Latin alphabet. You're like, why can't this just say shop, but with the, with our letters? Your eyes get tired.
I remember when I first lived in Germany in 1989, I saw this sign, Versicherung. And I said to my...
Versicherung.
What is it?
Versicherung.
Yeah.
Insurance.
Yes, insurance. Yeah. I was like, how many letters to say insurance?
Yeah.
So it's... because to me it was Versicherung. How do you say it?
It might have been the plural. I don't know, but Versicherung.
That's it.
So insurance. Yeah.
When you were there, what was it like? What
in Russia.
In Russia.
Okay, so for example, I'll give you a good kind of anecdote. I remember the very first day there. I remember flying into Petersburg because that's where I studied the first time. And so you're flying into St. Petersburg, and obviously St. Petersburg's a beautiful city, right, in the city centre. But when you're flying in, the airport's miles away, just like, the equivalent, how Stansted is Stansted, London, yeah. But it's not in London, right? It's the equivalent. So we flew into, like another county, shall we say, but it's the closest major airport to Petersburg. 40 minutes an hour, whatever, from the city. But as we're flying in, and the clouds start to give way, obviously, and the windows present this view, you just see these grey buildings.
That's what I mean.
These grey Soviet blocks that are like the remnants of the Soviet era that, people live in. And I thought, God, where am I going? If my mum and dad could see this, they'd be thinking, why have we let him go here? But, and I remember we landed at the airport. We went through customs. I had my guitar with me as well, so it took kind of longer for me to get through, because they needed to open it and check that it wasn't like a machine gun or God knows what. And anyway, I remember we were picked up by the school, the uni school's kind of like student staff body, whatever. And I lived quite centrally there, and I was taken to the door of the family with whom I lived. But I remember being in the car, and it was like -20, and I remember looking outside. The weather was awful, like really grey, that like sleet, you know, that sludgy snow in the centre of the city.
It's like living in Manchester.
But I tell you what, I remember being here, and when we got to the centre where it's beautiful, it's like Paris or somewhere, like, I was like, oh my God, I'm in Russia, you know, I'm in Russia. And it was just such a good sensation. I can't even convey it. It was so exciting. And when you see people, you know, particularly, I mean, the women who are my age as well, it'd be that cold, but they're like dressed as if there's, you know, the best party going on in the world.
It's -20 and they're dressed like they're from Newcastle.
Yeah, actually, and I tell you what, that's one thing that shocked me about Newcastle. You get there at like midday, 1 o'clock, and particularly the guys, but especially the girls, they're like ready to go out for like, you know, 10 o'clock at like that time of day. Yeah.
Did you ever think you could be arrested and charged with spying? Because that does happen.
Well, yeah, luckily when I was there, or unluckily, I guess, depends on your perspective, but it was... there was tension. It was after Crimea had been annexed in 2014 the first time, but
which they now say they should have got involved with and done more.
Yeah.
Should they?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's not. Yeah, I don't know. I have my opinion, but it's not really interesting.
What's your opinion?
But I think we should have. Yeah. Sadly.
And if we had have done, would Ukraine now never have happened?
I don't know, but you know, the only thing I would honestly say on that is that I think that Ukraine's fight now is much more a fight for our idea of democracy. Yeah, for sure. Because I think that, you know, I think there's a big difference between the Russian state and Russia itself. You know, whenever I speak about this subject, I try not to refer to it as Russia. For me, it's the Russian state. It's not.
You mean the Politburo and all that? That is the Russian state.
Yeah, you know, Putin, Medvedev, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister. You know, they're not representative of Russia in my view. Just as I would hope, you know, that other people in the world don't just see Boris Johnson as a representative of an exact reflection of. So
you say there were tensions when you were there. Did you feel them, or
to some extent? Yeah, definitely.
In what way?
Sometimes. Well, being from the UK, firstly, was great there, because people thought you were like gold dust. You know, why are you here? You know, do you know the Queen? Is it true you drink tea at like 5 o'clock or whatever? You know, Big Ben is the capital of Big Ben is in London. London is capital of Great Britain. That's what like, the older people who were from the Soviet era would say, that if they spoke barely any English, you know. But yeah, I mean, it was unbelievable. It was one of the best experiences of my life. I would go back tomorrow and relive it all again. Did
you have any negativity pointed at you?
Not really. No, I was very warming, and I met amazing people. I was lucky, maybe, but I had an amazing time. People were kind. People were really they were in some ways kinder than we are here, because I think their understanding of friendship goes far beyond ours in many ways. You know, I'd go to someone's house, I'd be welcomed in, they'd offer me paintings, take this back with you, and I was like, I don't have the space. I'd be offered, I don't know, tea, but like, you know, taking back like the boxes of the tea leaves and so on. I was like, I literally can't take this stuff back, thank you very much. And I think, don't get me wrong, I think that generally speaking the British are very kind and welcoming and warm, but I just think that it's a different understanding, you know.
What's a night out in Russia like?
Yeah, unbelievable. There's one night I remember in particular where we'd gone out just to a bar for some drinks. We'd gone for a dinner, and in Russia they know how to drink better than we do. Like, I know it's portrayed with vodka, but you know, over here when people do shots, they don't eat food really. Whereas, and I think this is the case in Poland as well, in other countries like that, you know, when you do a shot, you'll also have bread, or you'll have something to kind of absorb the alcohol. So we'd done all of that, and then we went out, and then we end up in this kind of club that was playing some sort of like techno EDM type deadmau5 kind of music.
I'm sorry?
So like this electronic dance music in like the centre of St. Petersburg, in the centre of Petersburg. And I remember we walked out at about 4 a.m, and it was still quite light, because the sun never really sets in the latter part of in the summer, because it's in the northern hemisphere, right? But then yeah, and I remember, you know, I saw what's called the Church on the Spilt Blood, which would be like the equivalent of something like St. Paul's Cathedral, or, you know, and I'm just there like, what is going on? I wasn't even particularly inebriated. But it's just that this weird, I'm in Russia, I'm at this, like, I've just gone out, and now I'm here at like 4 a.m, and I see this unbelievable, typical Russian church with those incredible domes,
Well, that's one has that picture of Russia, but then one also has the picture of those grey housing blocks.
But I love that juxtaposition. For me, that's so charming and sexy somehow. There's something really appealing about that, because, like, Russia, sadly, is an amazing experiment gone wrong. I see the events of today as, a culmination of what was the communist revolution of 1917, the October Revolution of 1917, with Lenin, and then, later Stalin and so on. Today is really a result of all of that. And, politically, I'm pretty convinced of that. And so, the West has made so many mistakes. The Russian state have made so many mistakes. But I don't know if this situation could have been avoided. But I think our understanding of Russia is, I think there's, to some extent, a kind of a degree of Russophobia or whatever. There's a lack of interest or willingness to understand. And it goes back to the First World War, because although, our monarchies were related, and there are famous pictures of Nicholas II and, is it George V? I don't know all that, but they look like, although they were first cousins, they look like brothers. They're very similar. But even then, I know, if you go to the Imperial War Museum and see these exhibits on the First World War, that British public opinion, even in 1914, of Russia was really low. In some ways, more despised than Germany was.
And why was that? Why was public opinion so low of Russia?
Then?
Yeah.
I don't know. It was always portrayed as a beast, like the kind of the odd bod of Europe, right? This kind of like ugly, gnarly bear, But I think to a certain extent it owns that attitude, that kind of badass attitude, if you like. But it's not a reflection of the people. And I know for a fact that most of my friends, yes, they're similar age to me, like late 20s, early 30s, and some who are a bit older as well, like kind of in their 40s. They're all still young people, but none of them feel that the events taking place in Ukraine should ever have happened. And also, that's one thing I would like to just add, if I may, that the idea of Russia invading Ukraine now, it would be like England invading Ireland, because so many Russian people have Ukrainian relatives, or they're half Russian, half Ukrainian, just like so many Brits are half English, half Irish, or half English, half Scottish, or Ukraine and Russia and Belarus, they're considered like, it's a bit like it's not a union, right? But the people are related. They have relatives from these places. So the only comparison I can really draw, in my view, it'd be like, England invading Ireland, or, one of those, like or England invading Scotland, or something crazy like that.
I was going to say, and you've kind of answered it really, do they hate the West?
Russia?
Or Russian people, the people, yeah.
The Russian state does, yeah. I think they're very bitter, maybe, about the West. And the Russian states, Putin's often portrayed as this chess player and that he's a genius. It's bollocks. He's not. They're very clever in that they see an opportunity and they see a gap and they'll go for it. They're reactive, So they'll see that the West has an issue. For example, in Syria, when I think in the Obama era, when the West started to kind of withdraw its presence from Syria. Not that there were ever many boots on the ground, but in terms of like kind of when there were, I think, like, I don't know the exact kind of details, but whether it's like some sort of support or, naval presence, air presence, when the US started to withdraw, Russia sort of crept in, and that's what they've done here. I think they've seen an opportunity and they've gone for it. Politically, they're not necessarily ahead of the game. I think they just know how to take an opportunity. And
they just wanted Mother Russia back. That's what he wants, isn't it?
Well, you have to remember that the guy in charge of Russia was really a nobody in the Soviet Union. He was in the KGB, which was their equivalent of, MI5, MI6. He was posted in Germany, had a relatively good job, but he was...
This is Putin.
Yeah. He's nothing special. He was posted in Dresden, lived there for 5-6 years, and then I think felt very bitter about the West. All of the guys, at the top of the echelons of Russian power, they're all of that Soviet era. They're all 60 plus, in their age. None of them know anything different. And then when the Soviet Union collapsed,
and yet they do, because they've all travelled.
They have travelled, but they're all kleptocrats as well. They steal from the regime, right? They're all unbelievably wealthy, and their interests aren't the Russian people. Their interests are their own safety. their own security. And, Putin wants to kind of get back at the West, I think. But the West gave, famously when the Soviet Union collapsed, Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the last General Secretary of the Soviet Union, and he was given a verbal guarantee, a verbal promise, allegedly, this is what they say, and Gorbachev has never denied this, he was given a verbal promise that the West would never encroach with NATO kind of into Eastern Europe. But Gorbachev, he was an amazing man, but he was also an idiot, because he was a lawyer, but he never took that promise in writing. And obviously once the Soviet Union collapses on Christmas Day 91, that's when it became, the Russian Federation. And gradually in the 90s then, NATO starts to expand, and then other countries start joining NATO that were never previously part of NATO, And I think Russia saw that as an invasion of its own backyard, if you like. It saw that, the West hadn't held up to its promise.
So will they be fizzing about Finland and Sweden?
Now that's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, famously the Soviet Union invaded Finland in the Second World War, but Finland managed to repel, this is in like 1940, but Finland managed to repel the Soviet Union, and they didn't take, they weren't able to conquer Finland.
Because they've just joined NATO,
I think my understanding, or they'd applied to join NATO and so on, yeah. But I think it's much more, for Putin, he then became the head of the FSB. He was launched, into stardom, if you like. He became the head of, so the KGB became the FSB in when the Soviet Union collapsed. He became the head of the FSB, which would be like becoming the head of MI5 or the head of MI6. And he was essentially given the presidency by the first president of Russia, a guy called Boris Yeltsin, who was famously an alcoholic, and the 90s for Russia was a terrible time, absolutely terrible time, because, it just been launched into capitalism. There are stories of people who had good jobs at universities, say they were a teacher, but then, they lost their jobs, they went out and sold T-shirts on the street, and, a lot of my friends, their parents, speak of the 90s as a really harrowing time, and that was their first taste of capitalism.
But Putin took over, wangled his way in, and 24 years ago, I think it is, and it got better under him. Yeah,
I think there's a period of, in that first, I think that had Putin done the right thing and relinquished his presidency essentially after 2008, so he was president till 2008, and then he did like in chess there's castling, there's that move where you can castle in chess, and they call it the same in politics, where Putin was the president, they handed the presidency to Medvedev, and Putin became the prime minister for 4 years, and then he became the president again in 2012. So he did like a castle. But, I think that he could have gone down in history as a positive, relatively speaking, a positive force had he kind of done the democratic thing and never gotten involved in politics again, or to that degree.
But he's turned it, so you're saying it was...
There were some good things.
Capitalism.
Yeah.
And now it's gone back to communism.
No, it's not communism at all. It's still capitalism, but that communist mindset still persists.
And how does that manifest itself?
Politically?
And for the people there?
Well, I mean, things in the internet are being banned. I think that they're trying to get rid of, or trying to ban like YouTube, Instagram, so on and so forth. It's harder to access these things, that's for sure. You need a VPN.
And so he's turned it into North authority. Yeah, but it's a bit like North Korea.
Not to that extent, but, I don't think it ever could be, simply because it's so large. But, yeah, it's definitely taken a sad turn the past year.
So it's a very backward country?
Yeah.
Or if I went, would I be surprised?
I wouldn't, in many ways, I wouldn't want people to go there now. Westerners to go there now, not because I'd fear for their safety outright, but I think it's just not a true reflection of what the country what it should be, what it is, and what it can be.
And do they love Putin or not? Or is it because of his coercion and dirty tricks that he's stayed in power?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. I mean, if he were, taken away from power, I don't know what would happen, but it wouldn't be a good thing for him. He'd be in a lot of trouble.
He would.
Yeah. Either he'd be, I think it would, and I'm not trying to kind of delve into the realms of conspiracy, but there would be a high chance that he'd be murdered or...
By another state?
No, by forces in Russia.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because, he's had to keep everything really under tight control. And Russia's it's an oligarchy, right? That, there are these rich businessmen that influence politics, and, Putin's really had to bring them in line. And, there are political forces within Russia as well. I'm not talking parties here, like Conservative, Labour and so on. I mean people who are really influential, that have vested interests and that are in a precarious situation, one of whom being one of our own oligarchs here, Roman Abramovich. Why is his hat, but he's got his hands tied behind his back here, because obviously some of the wealth that they must have is partly Putin's. It's all this is the tragic thing. It's all about money. It's all about money.
So some of his wealth is Putin's.
It must be, because of how the state operated when the Soviet Union collapsed. You have these industries like gas and oil that were bought up by people that had some degree of influence in the party, who became these oligarchs that have unbelievable amounts of wealth that goes far beyond the means of our comprehension, because it's just natural resources, right? But and this is it's all about lining pockets, and it's like I said earlier, it's a kleptocratic regime they take from the state.
So they don't all love Putin by any stretch of the imagination, but they have to. So it is a bit like North Korea.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely no freedom of expression, in that you can't just go out and protest. And when they do, they clamp down. There've been people arrested that have held up a blank sign. They've got a white piece of paper, A3 or whatever, and they've been arrested.
For what?
Because they're, in protest against the war, for example, in Ukraine. Or they have like a protest sign with just, loads of, with several asterisks, or asterixes, I don't even know what the plural is, but, that says no war. But, a few of the letters are kind of blanked out, and they'll still be arrested. And you can see these things on Instagram and on reliable sources as well, of, people filming their friend protesting, and as soon as he or she, they take out a sign, the police take them away into the van. It's, and to give an honest answer of your question, is Putin popular? I would say that he's popular enough, but there's a large enough undercurrent and movement that he's not popular, particularly amongst like my generation. People are very disillusioned. They don't really believe in the regime, what it's doing, and they don't think it's good, but they're too afraid to speak out.
So the people you know or knew, what did they say about their life in Russia? How do they describe it?
I think for all of us that are Russia involved in some way, I think there's a big, in our own memory of the whole thing and the place, there's a before and after, and that before and after is the 24th of February of this year, when Russia invaded. I'll never forget that day. Even though it was quite a normal working day, I was so sad. I couldn't believe it when I saw these images of Russian jets bombing Ukraine. For me, it was like, because I've spent quite a bit of time in Ukraine as well. I don't know as many Ukrainians. I have a lot more Russian friends, but for me, it was like a really sad day. Really sad day. It still is. And this whole scenario should have never happened, And
how could it have been stopped?
I don't know. I'm not interested enough. Obviously, I want peace and so on, but I'm not interested enough. I don't know enough about it, but it's just political mistakes on both sides.
And the people there can do nothing to change anything?
I mean, look, some of the biggest political opponents have been jailed. Very recently, the most famous one, who's quite famous in the West, is a guy called Alexei Navalny.
Yeah.
Jailed. Another guy who returned to Russia as well, a guy called Ilya Yashin, jailed. And these guys have really spoken out. They're basically Westerners. So they're Russian, but their ideals, their values, they're far more in line with our conception of democracy.
Are they any more or less corrupt than the rest of them? Are they actually decent people?
From what I know, I would say they're decent people. From what I know.
And so the people you know there, what do they tell you about their life now? Because I'm guessing that you're in touch with them.
Yeah, it's actually harder. Like, as in, I try not to speak about it with them. I know I've got a few friends, one or two where we spoke about it, and they either start crying, they're sad, or they're too afraid to speak about it. I remember once speaking to a friend a couple of months ago So they've got this app called Telegram, which is like, it's a bit like WhatsApp, but the encryption's supposed to be even better or something. But I remember she asked me to stop speaking because we wanted to check that the encryption code was the same. And I also know of a British guy, actually, who was kind of, the long story short, and I probably shouldn't go into the details because I think he's come home now, but he was actually beaten up by like a corrupt kind of ex-FSB force type thing, but he had to come home. But even there was once where I was speaking to him where we checked the encryption code, and I would never do this with someone in the US or France or the UK. So people are paranoid, you know, and it's all because of corruption, and you know.
And on one hand, the technology seems to be immense there, and they're all very clever. There's bots and there's this and that. And on the other hand, the whole country seems to be stuck in the 1950s.
Well, Russia's never known democracy, has it?
No.
Like, you know, it's never known democracy. It was, you know, under the Tsar, it was an authoritarian regime. Then comes, you know, the First World War destroys Russia, and then, you know, Lenin causes this, you know, cataclysmic revolution, communist revolution, then you know, Russia's communist till 1991. You know, and then 1991, it doesn't know real democracy. It's a democracy in name, has a constitution and so on and so forth, but it's not a democratic country. You know, Boris Yeltsin hands over power to Putin because it was in his interest to do so. The man who was the head of the FSB was the only man that could protect him, because had someone more democratic gotten into power in 1999-2000, Yeltsin and his family would have probably either had to flee the country, not because he'd done anything treacherous, but, you know, it's a poison chalice, you know, and illegal things had been done in the 90s. You know, there's the first Chechen war as well, and I'm sure there must have been pictures even in the UK press at the time, but of how, you know, this city in the south of Russia, Grozny, it was flattened, you know, by. So that's like it's a bit like the US or Germany. It's a federal country, right? It's made up of not quite states, but majority of the regions are called oblasts, but some of these regions or federal subjects of the Russian Federation are republics, and Chechnya is one of the most famous republics, but it was like flattened in the 90s. There was a war.
So can Russians have any standard of living now and before this happened to Ukraine? Do they have any decent standard of living, or are those sanctions working?
I think they can have a degree of good enough standard of living, decent enough, but it's not like the standard of living they'll know before 24th of February of this year.
And how does it?
But, I mean, for example, my friend texted me, you know, there's no more IKEA, no more McDonald's, no more, because all the Western companies or brands have left the country. So, you know, you can't go to IKEA and buy a sofa. You can't go to McDonald's and buy a Big Mac. You can't go to, I don't know, buy some sort of Western car if you've got the money. You know, they've all left. So I don't know how the country operates like that. But when I was there, you know, all of this stuff was there. Burger King, KFC. I don't know why I'm thinking of all the food chains. But, you know, and Western shops as well. I don't know, like H&M or, I don't know, maybe.
So it would be kind of Western to our eyes.
Oh, yeah, completely, yeah. But there's enough of a difference. You know, for me, that's why I say for me there's like this kind of fissure between, you know, the day before 24th of February and the day after. Because it's no longer the country that I know.
Do you think he's going to achieve what he wants? And it seems to me that he's going to achieve it by flattening Ukraine and anywhere else.
I don't know about anywhere else, but definitely. Yeah.
I know Hungary are a bit worried.
Hungary's a different question, though. They have their own issues. Orban, their leader's kind of, he's a bit of a black sheep in Europe anyway. He's a bit bonkers. He does his own thing. He doesn't really listen to the EU, although they're a member of from what I understand, I don't know much about Hungary, but he kind of does his own path, you know, trots his own path.
They're jittery, I know, from my friend's parents.
Oh, really? Yeah. I'm not surprised. But, you know, it's going to be a tough winter in the West, for sure, with gas, for sure. Because, you know, Russia can really tie our hands. And it depends which way Germany goes. Germany's pivotal. It's like the powerhouse of Europe, and they rely a lot on Russian gas, you know.
So is he going to achieve his vision, do you think?
I think...
From where we currently are?
I hope not. But I don't... You know, he'll just continue to flatten Ukraine. Yeah, I think. And I really have a lot of respect for Zelensky and the Ukrainian people fighting for their country and what they believe in. You know, ultimately they just want to be a country that determines their own future. You know, they just want to be a country that can choose to do, you know, to vote for what it wants.
Is that
and you know, ultimately, if I just may add, that Putin has this messianic vision of like a greater Russia, I think, and I think it stems, you know, from his belief system or being Russian, or his idea of being Russian. But he does have this messianic mission of restoring kind of a greatness. And you know, he famously last year, before this all happened, he wrote an essay. Allegedly, he wrote the essay, and I read it. You know, there was an English copy and like a Russian copy, and he argued that Ukraine and Russian people are one people. You know, and he mentioned, he notes Kiev and Rus, the place I spoke of, where, you know, Russia, Mother Russia started. You know, for him, they are one nation. They are not Ukrainians. They are Russians.
As a sidebar, the whole of Eastern Europe and certainly Russia has a major dislike of the LGBTQ community.
Right.
Do you know anybody in that community who lives there, and how do they survive?
It's fine. But, I mean, I don't know what it's like now, but before the 24th of February, they definitely can't have quite the existence that LGBTQ people can over here. But, you know, they can have like a relatively fulfilling life. Where it's precarious and dangerous is, you know, in schools, people don't learn about being gay. It's considered, quote, propaganda. And that's enshrined in law out there. And where I wouldn't feel comfortable being with kind of like an LGBT setting in Russia, LGBTQ setting in Russia would be, for example, I wouldn't want to know what would happen if men or women for that matter, but particularly men, if they were holding hands in the street and so on. I wouldn't want.
Because there have been horrible stories about what happens.
Yeah.
Why is it so haram, as I think they say in
Islam,
under Islam? Yeah.
Why?
Is the whole area of Eastern Europe and Russia very,
I suppose,
macho?
Yeah, I suppose it goes back to this idea of masculinity, what it means to be a man, you know, and the traditional role of men and women in that, you know, a man kind of in, perhaps not necessarily in there, I don't want to tarnish everyone with the same brush or all the countries with the same brush, but yeah, the idea that a man goes out to work and a woman raises a family, I suppose it does go back to that, and to some extent, you know, definitely to some extent linked with Christian values. Yeah.
So
because, you know, if you know, again, when the Soviet Union collapsed, there's this void in ideology, right? They'd had Lenin, they'd had communism, they'd had Stalin, these like godlike figures who, you know, created equality and enlightened the masses, you know. And I know communism, the Soviet Union here is portrayed as this evil country, and it did more, in many ways, it did more harm than good. It did some good things, you know, like the literacy of the country and so on and so forth, and it, you know, rights for women. You know, there are more female doctors in Russia than there are male doctors, and the education system was a lot better probably than it is now. It was one of the best education systems in the world. But, you know, there's this void of ideology in the 90s, and the ideology they bring back is kind of the old, you know, the old Russia, i.e., you know, Russian Orthodoxy.
When you go into a hospital in Russia, what's that like? Because you tend to think it must be like 1940.
I know that I had to go twice. Once I went to a private clinic, and that was like really nice. But the normal hospital, it's not. Yeah, that's a bit of a culture shock actually. It looks old, it looks run down, but the doctors are good. They're really thorough. You know, you'll go with like complaining of, I had like a bite that was infected and it had like swollen up quite badly, but they checked everywhere. Like they wanted to see my throat, they wanted to see and I don't think you'd get that in the UK. Like they'll just look at the area and they might ask you one or two questions, but I mean, they were testing other things as well, like completely unrelated. And I just said to them, no, you don't need to do that. And they were like, no, you do. We do. So it's our job.
LGBTQ people and people generally, are they crying out for Putin's reign to end?
I mean,
secretly?
They're dreaming of it.
Really?
Yeah. They're dreaming of it. No doubt.
Can it happen?
Putin's end? Well, it's inevitable.
Well, it's inevitable, but...
We're all mere mortals. I hope so.
You're now, you're a language teacher, and you're teaching Ukrainians who are over here, I think, to speak English. How are they after their journeys?
Well, they all dream of going home. They all dream of going home. That's the thing that's overwhelmed, that they always communicate to me is they want to go home. I think for them, what's the saying? East or west, but home is best. That's their sort of mentality. But they've lost everything, some of them. And, they need to rebuild their lives. They need to find work. They need to, a lot of them have children, obviously. They don't want them to grow up there where, I've seen, unbelievably shocking images of, when these bombs or missiles land, and now the Russian state is targeting cities that are in the west of Ukraine, but they're kind of doing these like, although there's no hot conflict going on in these cities, but they have missiled, cities and, killed like 30 people in one go. And very recently, a week ago, there was it became famous, after it happened, but a mother and her daughter, and this daughter had Down syndrome, but they were just, obliterated by a missile. In a city miles away, 500, 400 miles away from where the hot conflict is going on, and I don't really know what we can do. And I think, this is where Putin and the regime is so nasty and, pernicious and nefarious in the way it conducts business, shall we say, because they don't care. For them, human life has no value. And that's the tragic thing. And they lie. You can watch an interview with Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, and they lie. And they justify it by saying it's a special military operation. And I'd just like to add in this, I'm not saying that the way we act is perfect and that we're all squeaky clean and so on in the West, but the point being the degree of scrutiny over there is just non-existent. There's no free press. The last free newspaper was called Novaya Gazeta, so like the new newspaper, that's what it was called. They had to leave, and this guy, Sergei, I think Muratov is the editor. He won a Nobel Peace Prize, last year, this guy, and he gave all of the earnings, or he sold something recently, he's given all the earnings to the Ukrainian military or whatever, I don't know, but some sort of, so there are good people doing amazing things, but the Russian state is so powerful. The Ukrainians you're currently teaching to speak English, what did they tell you about their journey here? Through God knows how many countries, and most of them, they believe that they're lucky because some of them already had a relative here or a friend here. I think the journey to the UK is quite hard for Ukrainians. I think it's easier, obviously, geographically, that's one thing, but I think even politically and in terms of visas and documents, I think it's easier for them to get to Germany or Poland and actually have like a residency there. Poland are being amazing, aren't they? And all of those countries I think have taken on more than we have, but I don't know the process to get here, but some of them have worked really hard to get here, and I think good for you, because if you've lost everything and you've got nothing, and there's one I won't go into too much detail, but there's one person here who's a lawyer and they've lost everything and they were like really successful. I'm like, why? In an ideal scenario they'd love to go back, but they can't. Like what can they do? You can't imagine how it feels to lose everything. And most of the people I'm working with as well are above 50. There are some younger ones that are in their late 20s, 30s, but the majority are old people. Older people. Yeah, and where are they living? With families? Or? Yeah, with families, my understanding. I kind of try not to ask, but sometimes they'll tell me things, and And what do they tell you? A few people have, said, like I said before the interview, but there was this one man, the most harrowing story, where he said, my town, Kharkov, or Kharkiv in Ukrainian, it's like the second city of Ukraine, so the equivalent of our Birmingham, and he said now it's the Stalingrad of today. It's like smithereens, and I don't know. My history is not what it should be. What does that mean? Stalingrad of today. So obviously when probably one of the most famous battles of the Second World War was the Battle of Stalingrad, and it's kind of where the war probably turned against Germany. That's one of the most pivotal battles. So 1942 to 1943, there's this battle in a city which was then called Stalingrad, which is today called Volgograd. And that city was completely and utterly annihilated in the Second World War. It had been encircled, and so what do you think his end game is? To rebuild Mother Russia, but it seems his game now, Putin, is to flatten
the whole country.
The day before.
Who's going to rebuild it?
Yeah, who knows? That's an amazing question, because the GDP of Ukraine will be, I don't know, 40% less. Probably half the size economically of what it was. I guess people will rebuild it, won't they?
You were going to say the day before?
Yeah, the day before all of this happened, so the 23rd of February, Putin released this video, and I found it stupidly, naively, looking back, I kind of laughed because I thought it wasn't that serious, but obviously it was. And, part of the Russian state, their narrative around the war is denazification of Ukraine. That's because to justify the war, they often portray Ukraine as a Nazi sympathising nation or a fascist state and so on and so forth. It's a bit of a segue, but basically he said something. He looked in the camera really seriously and he says, if you want to see what denazification really is, we'll show you. We'll show you. Like, we mean business. And I found it funny, even because I thought it was a joke in a way. Like, not a joke, but Putin's often had this sort of very vociferous rhetoric and these sort of really bold statements, and I thought it was just another one of those kind of really kind of macho statements, but I think they meant business.
Is there any way there could ever be a positive outcome?
This peace, but I don't know if the fighting were to stop. I think that'd be good. I know a lot of Ukrainians over here who I've gotten to know since the war commenced, and a lot of them would see, now I know this isn't reflective of probably Ukraine more widely or Ukrainian people, but the people I've spoken to, so they're obviously a very small minority, but they've said it would be better to have peace and lose parts of the country than for this scenario to keep going on.
And these people obviously have family, and fathers and brothers fighting.
Yeah. But they've said it's much better to have peace and lose regions or lose counties, whatever you want to call it, but to have peace and security and safety and to try and rebuild. Yeah.
Thank you very much, by the way. Fascinating. How do you keep all this stuff in your head? Because your head is the same size as mine, and mine doesn't have as much in it as yours does.
I like reading. I like just speaking with people. Like yourself, I like having conversations. And I think you can always learn from every conversation teaches you something new. And I like reading, and I don't know, just staying aware. I know I've spoken a lot actually about history and politics and so on, but it's not my favourite topic. Especially with how sad it can be and depressing and stuff. But it's, I suppose I feel attached to that area, and I want to, I don't know, try and help in any way I can, I guess.
What was it?
My lecturer. Yeah, so one of my dear lecturers at uni, a guy from the south of Russia, a big city, and he was kind of going on a small kind of rant, like a polemic about something. And he said, he was talking about the combination. So I did German and Russian, and at my uni you could do French and Russian, Spanish and Russian, and German and Russian. So I did German and Russian at uni, right? But I was one day, we had like not a seminar, like a one-to-one meeting. And he goes, the people that do Spanish and Russian, I don't understand them. They're strange. People that do French and Russian, kind of boring standard combination. But people that do German and Russian, I want to know, what is your trauma?
I think I get that. Trauma because...
So Ivan always maintained, and he actually invited me to... We're going to have a conference actually in October about this, the kind of a topic we've been discussing, teaching Russian culture post 24th of February 2022. And Ivan, this guy, basically, for him, that combo of German and Russian, perhaps they're languages that are harder for English speakers than French or Spanish. German not being as hard as Russian, but they're both very grammar heavy, very kind of weird, and they have these strange inflections and so on in the language. For him that's a, why are you torturing yourself with this madness?
Oh, sorry, I was more thinking of wars and things.
Maybe that as well, because and once famously when I was at a comedy gig in London, and I happened to be sitting in the front row, and the guy, it was like a a comedian who wasn't famous at the time, he might be now, and he's like, oh, what do you do? And I was like, oh, I'm a student. Okay, he's like, great, another student here, blah blah. Someone else that doesn't work. He was like, what do you study? And I was like, oh, I do German and Russian. He was like, what? And you're going to be an interpreter for all these war films and all of this, you know, and all this dark sort of historical stuff that's gone on. So I suppose that's part of the madness package, if you like. I don't know.
That the date, though, that the conflict began is really striking you, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, it's that's a traumatic thing as well. Like I said to you, or said earlier in this interview, I remember that day really clearly, being on the phone, and the family with whom I lived in St. Petersburg, you know, I texted them a message and said, what on earth is going on? And you know, they were really sad as well. You know, they couldn't believe it. It was just, you know, I'll never forget these images of waking up in the morning. My phone was like blowing up. People texting me like, what's my opinion? And I was in no state to give an opinion. But, you know, and then my friends saying like, this is really sad, you know, Russian friends, or this is traumatic. This is really, yeah, it was a historic day, you know. And I'll never forget those images of Russian, you know, jets bombing and you know, all of that.
Would you say largely the Russian population is against it, or not? Because I've heard both sides.
It's so hard. And
somebody said to me the older people are for it, the younger against.
Generally, I'd say that's fair enough. I'll put it this way as well. I think sadly there are enough, I've heard enough opinions that people are for it, you know. But whether that's a majority, I don't know. And I would really, you know, there are academics in the West, some of whom I know, you know, some have become friends, you know, lecturers that taught me, but, you know, and even they're posing this question. It's really hard to tell, you know, the stance that people have, and it's certainly not as black and white as it's, you know, conveyed to us. There's definitely people who are for it, that I will say, and I'm not going to, you know, defend, you know.
And but
there are a lot of people against it as well.
Are the Russian people as scared of a nuclear war, nuclear attack as we are? Or do they just
maybe
think
not? But
win?
what I know that Russian people are scared of is the police, and it's the lack of freedom. And you know, I've got friends who are crying out. They're desperate to protest. They're desperate to leave, you know, because they want to live in a far more free environment. But you know, why would you go out and protest if you know that you could be sentenced to 10 years and lose 10 years of your youth? You know, for a conflict that, yes, it impacts you, but you know, it's not as simple as just going out and protesting. You know, I don't know what I would do. You know, I'm lucky that, you know, I've had the privilege. I've got to experience Russia as a Westerner, you know, and I've had some amazing adventures there and so on. But
and you never felt threatened?
No, never. There was even once I joked about being a spy. You know, I was standing in a queue at a bar, and the guy's like, "How do you know Russian this well if you're foreign?" I said, "Oh, I'm a spy." And there was this 10-second period where he looked at me really uncomfortably, and I was with an Irish guy from my uni at the time, and he was like, "Why did you say that?" You know, but I was laughing. I didn't take it seriously. And then after about another 10 seconds, he sort of gave like a weak smile. And then this barman or the bouncer gave like a weak smile, and he was like, "Actually, that was quite funny." You know, and so, you know, everything, tension eased.
They get irony then.
Yeah, but I certainly wouldn't say that now if I were there. No way.
Listen, you've been fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah,
Where were you born?
In Sidcup. Yeah.
And now you're teaching elsewhere. Say something nice, if you would, in Russian, to end us.
Okay. Конечно, я хотел бы желать всем нашим слушателям хорошего дня, хорошего настроения. И мы все надеемся на то, что война скоро закончится. И мы желаем всем людям на земле мир. Вот. Это то, что я хотел бы всем сказать. So I just said that I'd like to wish all of our listeners a good day and a good mood, and that for the war, that we all hope that the war soon ends, and that we what else did I say at the end? I don't even remember. Yeah, that those are the things that I'd like to say, and that I wanted to say.
Tom, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.